All right, welcome back, everybody. I'm Neil Cavuto. A lot of people have been mentioning the fact that the St. Patrick's Day parade are already getting ready for that. In fact, it's going to launch in just a few seconds in New York. And say, well, Neil, where's your green tie? Well, St. Patrick's Day is tomorrow. And I wore a green tie early in the week, and a lot of people are saying it doesn't matter. Well, I didn't even know that the parade was going to be today until I came in today. No, I kind of knew. But, boy, they're celebrating the whole weekend. But the bottom line is it's happening here. It's happening across the country. In Chicago, they dyed the river green. That's a big thing. I don't know how long it takes for the green to go away. But in Chicago, that's how they celebrate. In New York, they're celebrating big time. I get in here very, very early in the morning. I was in here before 5 a.m., and they were already going nuts out on the streets. So, you know, you don't want to engage in a very long conversation with these people at that hour because they're having a good time, which is good. And so are we. All right, now back to presidential politics because the two are so incredibly closely tied, including Joe Biden, who apparently is going to be jumping into a separate sort of a pool here, the presidential pool. And it's a crowded pool at that. Fox News reporter Jillian Turner in Washington, D.C. with more. Hey, Jillian.
Hey, Neil, why aren't you wearing any green?
Oh, here you go. You're the latest one, by the way. Go ahead. How's this looking?
It's looking good, Neil. So sources close to Joe Biden tell Fox News this week he's gearing up to announce his presidential candidacy any second now. But the former vice president is still playing it coy.
I'd like you all to, I appreciate the energy you showed when I got up here. Save it a little longer. I may need it in a few weeks.
Biden said he's tired of cutthroat Washington politics and wants to return to a time when politicians on both sides of the aisle could be friends. Last week, he was forced to apologize after referring to the current vice president as a decent guy.
Sometimes it seems like we can't govern ourselves or even talk to one another. If you notice, I get criticized for saying anything nice about a Republican.
Progressive Democrats are veering ever further left in the run-up to the 2020 race, homing in on Medicare for all, free college, and universal basic income. But there's still a solid core of 2020 hopefuls who are in a race to the center.
I know Vice President Biden well. I respect him. I welcome him into the race. I question whether he, not unlike Mayor Bloomberg, who I also have utmost respect for, can find a pathway as a centrist person within the Democratic platform today.
What remains to be seen is what impact Biden's entry will have on the polls. So far, he's consistently come out near the top, but he would be the first official centrist to enter the race who's got a long track record in politics. Decades in the House and then Senate, and then 8 years at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. So the big risk Biden faces now is continuing to tease his announcement going to soon start working against him. Over the coming weeks, there will be increasing pressure on big donors, consultants, and political operatives to sign on with other candidates. The resources here in Washington, D.C., as you know, Neil, are finite.
You know what's finite? The ability to find green, apparently, Jillian, because you're criticizing me. And I don't see any green here. What's going on?
Well, you know, I'm not anchoring today, so I don't have the same kind of obligation that you have.
Right. Touche. Making her final report on this show, Jillian Turner. No, seriously, Jillian, thank you very, very much. All right, well, as Jillian pointed out, I mean, Joe Biden would be a big fish in this and the instant front runner. The consensus is that it's his nomination to lose, even in a crowded field. But history does point out the consensus can be very, very wrong. Back with me now is Chris Wilson. We got Jessica Tarloff, Kat Tim. Let me just go back. That first one you see there, this kind of shows it. This was back in December of 2007 when we're getting ready for the 2008 race. Clinton maintained a large lead over Obama nationally. Fast forward to 2016 in May of that year. A commentary, 10 reasons Hillary Clinton will beat Donald Trump. Now go forward to November 5th, 2016. Clinton has a solid lead in the Electoral College. Trump's winning map is unclear. That's the New York Times. Then another one, the month before, that same election year. This, of course, comes from the Washington Post. Trump is headed toward a major loss. The GOP can't say that it wasn't warned. We're going to be right through some other examples of this, and at times where we just got it wrong, that no one thought Bill Clinton had a chance to win in the November election. Remember, that was the one that George Bush Sr. Thought he was unstoppable, and most other people did as well. Again and again, proven wrong again and again. What kind of lessons can we learn, Kat?
Well, first of all, trust no one or no poll ever. I promised myself after 2016 I would never trust a poll again. But other than history, when it comes to Joe Biden, there are other reasons why you should take this with a grain of salt. And one of those is a lot of these polls don't have an undecided option on them. And if you do have a poll with an undecided option, his share of the vote drops from 20-30% to around 9 to 12%. So there's a huge difference. It's mostly about name recognition, really, which is why a lot of these people might say, I don't really know, but I've heard of this guy, and so they'll pick Joe Biden.
You know, Jessica, you know the Democratic types more than I do, and who they like and who they don't like. But Biden has had 2 other runs for the presidency, right, and he tends to look good from afar, but once in, far from good. Could the same thing happen this time?
I don't think it would be as dramatic as it has been the past 2 times that he did this, because he is just coming off 8 years as Barack Obama's vice president, and Obama is incredibly popular, and they really have that bromance thing going on that people love. When they show up in D.C. together, people go nuts. But
now we're getting reports that Barack Obama is kind of keen on Beto, right?
I didn't see that report, but that
he's been advising him.
Well, he met with a bunch of the candidates,
okay,
and he has said that he's going to stay out of the primary. There are a lot of people in the primary that he's very close to, including Kamala Harris. So obviously met with Beto and Biden. I do think that once he actually gets in the race, obviously some of the support will sap. It is a name ID issue, harkening back to also the Obama years, but he will pick up some votes that support that's going to other candidates, I think, from across the spectrum. And I would add that Amy Klobuchar, who's officially the only centrist in here right now.
I always forget about her, too.
Well, because the comb thing is largely
the only
over,
thing I
so
remember is the egg salad.
But with Sherrod Brown taking himself out, and apparently that happened the day after he had a call with Joe Biden and mentioning his support for Joe Biden when he did that, that does clear the way a lot more for Joe Biden when he does get it.
Well, it's still a crowded field.
Yes.
Right? So looking at that, as someone who reads the numbers and the potential threats to the president, who would they be?
Well, I think, first of all, it's interesting that Joe Biden in 2020 is being considered a centrist candidate. The last 2 times he ran, he was seen as a far-left candidate. And that just shows how far left the Democratic Party has moved, is that he is now their centrist. I think that Biden would be strong getting in, but to add to sort of pile on to those past polls, at this point in 2016, Jeb Bush was seen as unbeatable in the Republican primary, and he didn't make it past South Carolina. So I do think things are going to evolve quickly. Biden's biggest strength right now is his connection to the Democratic establishment. That's not necessarily the Democratic establishment you see on Twitter, or that you see represented on the cable news shows. It's the Democratic establishment that existed around Barack Obama.
But someone is going to get nominated, right? It's going to be one person. And with Bill Clinton in 1992, when that all started,
came from nowhere.
George Bush Sr. was unstoppable. And then they sort of maligned the Democrats as the 7 dwarfs trying to run against him. Right. He emerged as the lone dwarf, and he won. So,
he did.
Now,
well, that's why,
so what would you look for?
Well, I think we're going to, coming out of Iowa and New Hampshire, those are really going to be what someone's going to catch lightning in the bottle right then. That's kind of what Trump did in 2016. And you're right now that Sanders is pretty far out front. If Biden gets in, to Kat's point, it's close, but there are not a lot of undecideds right now, and I think you'll see that evolve over time. If Sanders holds that lead, then you move to New Hampshire. You've almost got like a runoff campaign between Warren and Sanders, because it is both their home states. And then you move into this long slog of Texas, California, all these states that are proportional, decided by congressional district. You got to get 15%. I think that keeps Kamala Harris in. So my bet is it's going to be Sanders versus Harris running for it at the end. I don't think Biden is far enough to the left, and he's kind of got this old white guy stigma. If Obama doesn't come in and bail him out, he can't.
Well, Beto O'Rourke, who's, by the way, campaigning in Iowa as we speak right now, he's got that young white guy standard.
He does. He's gesticulating across the state, and it's really exciting to watch. But I just think he is not going to survive the media scrutiny he's undergoing.
I see what you did there, the hand thing.
You like that?
It was cute. I just want to add to that, South Carolina will be pivotal on the Democratic side. And Joe Biden actually has a huge amount of support there. It's kind of a misassessment of the race to just say that it would go to a black candidate like Cory Booker or Kamala Harris. He has deep ties there. I'll also add that he was meeting with Stacey Abrams, and there is talk of entering the race with a VP already designated. So kind of saying this is the ticket. So you have a little bit of everything for people. If you want a far left progressive, if you want a person of color, for instance, you have Stacey Abrams to satisfy that. If you want more of a centrist and the safety hand, someone who knows foreign policy. The number one thing Democrats say consistently is we want to elect someone that can beat Donald Trump.
Yeah, they keep talking about candidates who lost their race in 2018. It's really an interesting, we got Beto O'Rourke, we got Stacey Abrams, we got Andrew Gillum. They all lost their races. Can't you go find someone who actually won their race that you think is an electable candidate?
It is hard for a Democrat to win in Georgia
Or
for the
Texas.
governorship or in Texas, and they did get pretty close. And they also have the electric national press vibe going on, which people like, and they know them. They know Stacey
A lot of it
Abrams.
is not everyone. You have to remember, not everybody is us, right? Not everybody's following these things so closely. A lot of people are like, "Oh yeah, I saw that guy in a magazine," or "Oh yeah."
But I
I've heard
will
of that
say
guy."
this, and a lot of it, there is an arrogance to the media, and I know this comes as a surprise to a lot of people. They call it never Trumper, you're never fair to the president. But I remember saying very early on, after he announced, having covered it in business for decades, that he was not to be dismissed, that there was a passion in his crowds lacking in Hillary Clinton's crowds. She had to rely on entertainers to generate those crowds. He did not. And I saw that then, and I'm not the sharpest tool in the shed. So I'm just saying, is there someone right now who galvanizes crowds unlike any of the other Democrats?
I mean, Sanders does and Harris does as
Kamala
well,
Harris
Yeah,
which
her
is
rollout
interesting
was
because
impressive.
Sanders had the advantage last time around of being the only super progressive, only one saying things like Medicare for all.
And
now
he's raised
not,
by far
so
the
he's-
most money, and largely in
right.
small denominations. to kick
Right,
things off.
absolutely. He absolutely
volunteer
has. But in terms
signups.
of crowds, I think that
See, I
Harris can't
followed
be
the
discounted
small
either.
money. I followed the little denominations here, and that went early on for Barack Obama in 2008. That went early on again in 2016 among the Bernie Sanders folks. Now the system was such that I guess your party rigged it against him.
That's what I'm told.
That's
but
what I'm
it's hard to rig 4 million votes.
And those small donor
this-
donations are important. And the interesting thing, just
Because that leads to bigger donor.
It does, but the other aspect of it is that first 24 hours, and I think it is fascinating that O'Rourke has refused to
We were
announce
talking
what he
about
raised in his first 24 hours. He's saying, "Oh, I don't want to talk about that right now," and it is.
that right?
But his
Not
emails
a lot.
had
That's right.
said
That's
the
right,
first
yeah.
24 hours are critical.
Yeah.
Are you with me? Every email that I got was emphasizing that.
Yeah.
Sanders also, he benefited by being the only far lefty in 2016. Now there are more of them, but because there are so many candidates, it will be easier to get through.
That's right.
So
Yeah, it's not just a
benefit
two-vote
and a
He's also
curse.
not really the underdog, so he's going to face more media scrutiny.
But
than
you can
he
only
did
be an
last time
insurgent
around.
once, also. So how does he catch that? There's so many different dynamics. to
Yeah,
this,
it's hard to get lightning twice.
And to point it out, in 2016, no one had announced on the Republican side by this date.
Is that right?
Yeah, March 23rd is whenever we announced Cruz. We were the first ones in. No one had announced by today.
That's amazing.
We
Yeah.
started too early, guys.
Yeah.
Everybody go home.
No,
Or to the parade.
Come on, we have graphics packages, music. All right, thank you guys very, very much. Just a quick look in New York here. The parade is on. The early St. Patrick's Day festivities are on across the country here, so people are in a partying mood. Are they necessarily in a political celebration mood? Well, apparently that particular cameraman is.
I'm off to college. I'm worried about my parents' retirement.
Don't worry.
They will not have died in vain. Did I tell you that a long time ago? 4 years ago.
4 years ago.
Right? When we first met.
Yes.
On the
4 years
campaign.
ago. Yes.
When they said, "Oh, Trump's not going to win." You said Trump was going to win, and I said, "And they will not have died in vain." Right?
Right, you told us that.
And that's true. I say it today with even more meaning. It's a big step.
That was a moving moment for the President of the United States, choosing a very public venue and means by which to get the nation's attention and those who might even be thinking about challenging him again to override his veto on this emergency measure that will protect him at getting more funding for a wall. Angel mom Savina Durden, that was the woman he was talking to, was at that veto signing ceremony. Her son Dominic Durden, 30 years young, was killed by an illegal immigrant with a truck while he was riding his motorcycle, and she was kind enough to stop by with us today. Sabina, very good to have you.
Good morning, Neil. It's an honor to be back with you.
I cannot fathom what you've been through since that tragic day, but the president is saying it's an emergency at the border because of what you went through, and that's why you were there, right?
Absolutely. And I brought the pen. I brought that famous pen that he signed the veto with. It's invigorating. It's like a shot of vitamin B to be back with the president. Know he's fighting for us, for the angel moms and dads, and for all Americans, so they won't know what this feels like. Because for almost 7 years, it's 24/7. The pain never stops. And this fight gave me new life, and fighting for others not to know what this is about. And I'm so proud of our president.
Now, Sabina, there were a number of people who said they feel for your loss, but that this wasn't the means by which the president should have forced this issue. For example, Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer criticized the president, saying it's no surprise that the president holds the rule of law and our constitutional and minimal regard. He went on to say there is no emergency at the border. What did you think?
Oh, it absolutely is, because if you catch thousands at the border, and now they're just walking over, throwing up their hands, claiming amnesty. If you have thousands of people constantly flooding our country, and we know they're not just coming here for a better life, they're draining our system, things that belong to American citizens, or like legal immigrants like myself. I had to stand in line. I had to pay. I had to go through the proper procedures to be here, to earn my citizenship. I didn't skip lines. My son didn't either. And it's just not fair. And for Schumer and those 12 traitors, that's what I call them, that went against our president, we remember you. Marco Rubio, I remember really way back when the presidential campaign was going on, he talked about the new Americans. I know what that was for. That was for illegal aliens, not Americans. So I kind of know their language now, and it's shameful that any of our elected officials, and I don't care what side they're on, are not fighting for Americans. It is an emergency. It's a catastrophe. It's horrible what's happening to Americans, and sadly, the mainstream media doesn't want us to speak about it. So I'm very grateful for you to give Dominic and myself a voice.
Now, having said that, you're talking about the mainstream media. Apparently, you made an effort to talk to CNN's Jim Acosta, and interview yourself or a representative of the Angel Mom movement. What did he say?
Well, I called him out right after I got up, after the president left the podium in the Rose Garden, and I called him out on, first of all, calling them undocumented immigrants. They are illegal aliens by law. That's defined. It's not racist. And I called him out on always quoting that illegals commit less crimes than Americans. And I told him that we should have zero crime by illegal aliens. They shouldn't even be here. And my son's death was one too many. And he put on this Oscar-worthy performance, putting his hand on his heart and telling me how sorry he was for our loss and how CNN felt. And I called him out on not having us on. In 7 years, I've been on there twice. Some have never been on. And I told him I wasn't going to be his prop when he offered to stand behind him when he goes live and he will point to us. How disrespectful and just arrogant. And then when he called out that the president calls him fake news, I said, well, I have to agree with the president. He is. And he keeps proving that. So it was a beautiful moment that I still have to laugh about. And I gave him my business card, and glad I didn't hold my breath because he hasn't called yet or contacted me.
All right. We'll watch closely, Sabina. Thank you very, very much. Sabina Durden, Angel Mom, lost her beautiful boy, all of 30 years old, at the hands of an illegal immigrant driving a truck. Shouldn't have been there, but he was. More to this.
Carla,
Americans, the vast majority of Americans, want to see common sense solutions to significant problems that both parties will not solve.
All right. Starbucks founder Howard Schultz seriously contemplating a presidential run of his own. Spoke to him earlier this week as a third-party challenger. He would have preferred running as a Democrat, but he says the Democratic Party really doesn't get it, so he feels like odd man out. That might be the same sort of predicament my next guest feels. Bill Weld is the former governor of Massachusetts, who wants to challenge this president for the Republican nomination. He joins us right now. Governor, very good to have you.
Neil, always good to be with you. I'll tell you what's on my mind. I think it'll be a surprise to you. I saw your earlier footage of Beto O'Rourke's hands. I think Beto and the president are separated at birth. The president's hands, when he's making fun of Lion Ted or Little Marco or the guy in the wheelchair, his hands are like this. I think he and Beto both are listening to the music of an invisible orchestra, like frustrated conductors.
What do you make of that, though, that he's already tried to come up with a name, and maybe it works? It works certainly in the Republican nomination pursuit, where he had quick labels, pithy labels for all his opponents. What is he going to do to you?
All I can tell you is I'm getting my left hand high.
Now, why are you considering this? Now, I know it's not final, but a lot of those who know you very well say you're very serious about it. They call it a suicide mission. What do you say?
No, I say the opposite. I mean, I wouldn't be doing this for fun. And you know me. I've thought for at least a decade that I could start doing that job that President Trump has on Monday. I have a deep experience in both the private sector and internationally and domestically. Justice Department, 2 terms as governor, et cetera, rated the most fiscally conservative governor in the United States because of cutting spending. I don't think this president, frankly, is an economic conservative at all. And I think he's way off base on climate change and environmental issues. I think he added, his 10-year budget added $7.9 trillion to the deficit. So it's going to be, at the end of this budget period in the president's projections, it's going to be $30 trillion, not $22 trillion anymore. That's really not fair to the millennials and the Generation X's and our children and grandchildren.
Well, it might not
so
be, but 90% of Republicans poll, Governor, as you know, they like him. They think he's doing a good job.
I get that. And that's a poll, and that's a snapshot in time, as your folks were talking about earlier. But I think the reality is going to sink in that, we need allies as force multipliers. And this president candidly goes out of his way to insult our allies while he's, making love to the biggest dictators in the world. So
let me ask you, the track record on those who challenge incumbent presidents. That party ends up losing in the fall, whether it was Lyndon Johnson originally facing a challenge from Eugene McCarthy, opts out of the race, or Jimmy Carter and Ted Kennedy, you know what happened there, and on we go, even with Ronald Reagan and Gerald Ford. So the history is such that whatever the good intentions of the challenger, the party goes down to defeat.
Well, it is true that in the 10 elections since the modern New Hampshire primary, and that's Estes Kefauver in 1952, the 5 times that a sitting president had a challenger, he lost.
Right.
And the 5 times and we always was he, of course, and the 5 times that the sitting president running for re-election had no challenger, he cruised to victory. So,
well, does that make you worried that as a Republican, so you will, of Donald Trump, you lead the party down to defeat? Would you prefer the Democrats?
No, I'm not prepared to say that. I think the Dems in this cycle are just going loony left, really. I mean, they're leading the charge into the president's not far off when he says socialism. These proposals from the Democrats are completely unaffordable.
So you wouldn't support a Democratic nominee over Donald Trump if he were to beat you for the nomination? You'd vote for Donald Trump?
Well, I wouldn't say that. I mean, I really think the president is, and you know this, out of the mainstream in terms of his decisions, both domestically.
So you would never support him?
I think it's unlikely, Neil. I'm not suiting up to support a Democrat, and I will be criticizing Democrats and their excessive spending habits and unreality.
You tried that, though, as a third-party candidate. Last go-around, you did well with Gary Johnson. I think the two of you got about 4.5 million votes. You were his running mate. But it doesn't close the deal. And I'm wondering how you get and how you focus to get 270 electoral votes, should you get the nomination in that kind of situation.
Well, I think my path would run from the 6 New England states down through the mid-Atlantic states and then to the west, certainly in the primary against Mr. Trump. He's not exactly having a love affair with California or Oregon and Washington would be friendly.
Well, is your hope New Hampshire then, Governor, that given your proximity there, you're a 2-term Massachusetts governor, that would help give you a strong showing in New Hampshire?
That's definitely part of the plan, yeah. And I remember I was with George H.W. Bush at the end of 91 and early 92. His popularity was 91% nationwide in December of 91, and he lost. And he lost partly because Pat Buchanan got just 37% of the vote in the New Hampshire primary. I was up in New Hampshire that night, and I had to take the mic because all the Bush guys were just disconsolate. And so I said, this is great. The president won over 60%. We're on our way. But it was part of the pudding that wound up with George H.W. Bush, to my considerable surprise, losing the election.
Yeah, what's interesting, too, because it comes at a time when Jeb Bush has said that the president does need to be challenged within the party. Names have been mentioned, like Maryland Governor Larry Hogan, also John Kasich, the former governor of Ohio. What do you think of that? Do you think it should be a crowded field of challengers, yourself included?
It might be better. I mean, I'm not getting out if they get in, but I like them both. I know Kasich well. All that I know about Governor Hogan is positive. And what the exact dynamic would be from that maybe whichever one of the three of us emerged would look stronger. So it could be a positive dynamic.
All right. So as far as running against the president, trying to get a nomination, I mean, you have to damage him in some way. Maybe to your point, Governor, it is in New Hampshire, or slow down his momentum in the South. But to get the nomination itself, you would readily acknowledge you need more of the party types going along with you. Right now, they're not, right?
Well, you know, I don't think that the decision should be made by the party bosses and the people running the state parties. The state parties, state Republican parties, are under enormous pressure from the White House and the Republican National Committee to make sure there's no primary, that the president has no contest. I see that in New Hampshire. I see that in my own state of Massachusetts. But at the end of the day, I think it should be the people. And part of my job is going to be to try to enlarge the electorate that participates in these primaries. For example, if we had mobile voting with adequate security measures, that would enlarge the pool.
You never know. All right, I'm jumping on you because this break is now. More to this.
Thanks, Neil.
Book your spring break or summer vacation by March 18th at 1-800-ATLANTIS or AtlantisBahamas.com.
You know, it was a week ago tomorrow that we had that Ethiopian air crash involving a Boeing 737 jet, and all of a sudden now we're wondering what the latest status is on those black boxes that have finally arrived in France. There's been a lot of bickering with them. We're not going to know the details of what they're finding on those black boxes, but it comes at an interesting time where people are getting very, very impatient and tying two crashes together. Let's go to the former FAA safety manager, Jeff Guzzetti. Jeff, why is there such a delay on this?
Good morning, Neil. Well, part of the delay is the delay in getting the black boxes read out.
Yeah, I guess.
In most investigations, you plan to get those boxes on their way to a laboratory somewhere close by, even if your own country doesn't have it, to download it to see what happened. In this case, I think they lost about 3 days deciding which lab to go to. But besides that, it just takes a long time to cull through the forensic evidence and to look into all the aspects to really nail down what caused the accident.
Do you think, Jeff, taking all these jets and grounding them was the right move?
I do think it was the right move. And even though the optics might not look good for the FAA because it came they grounded it a day after all the other countries had grounded it, they stuck to their guns and did not ground an airplane simply based on public fears or political pressure. They grounded it because they got hard evidence. The stabilizer trim setting that they found in the wreckage, plus refined satellite data, gave them pause in terms of connecting similarities to the Lion Air accident from 5 months ago.
I'm curious what you think of this software upgrade fix that Boeing is considering for these planes, I guess, in the next week or so. What's that going to do?
Well, that software fix is going to basically shore up a hole in one of the many holes of a Swiss cheese in an accident where the stabilizer trim was allowed to run away, so to speak, perhaps due to a faulty sensor. And even though that mimics a typical stabilizer trim runaway scenario that all airline pilots must train to periodically in a simulator, in this case, it may have surprised the crew. We just don't know yet. So this software fix will simply ensure that one faulty sensor will not cause this unintended movement of the stabilizer trim.
Does that indicate an acknowledgement on the part of Boeing that the plane did have a problem and that some of these criticisms from those who tried it, written about it, talked about it are right?
Yes and no, Neil. You know, it's semantics. Problem? I don't know. Boeing says it's a safety enhancement from a system that's already safe. But I think it's clear that it's a deficiency that was overlooked in some fashion. The question is how severe a deficiency? I mean, it really it cannot be that one thing in of itself that brings down an airplane. That's why you have seasoned captains and a redundant first officer. That's why you have backup systems. That's why you have training. So, yes, is it something undesired? Yes, but is it something that is solely responsible for causing these accidents? Absolutely not, in my view.
You know, a lot of people all of a sudden are afraid of flying all over again. Forget about the models in effect here or the concerns here. What do you tell potential flyers, regardless of the jet?
You know, flying is a risky business, right? A man wasn't meant to fly. You know, slipping the surly bonds of Earth involves risk. So if the global community wants to be able to fly all around the world and conduct business, well, then the FAA's job is to manage that risk. And I think they do a great job doing it. If you're a fearful flyer, don't fly. But in any event, if you're not a fearful flyer, then count on the certification that was done on the airplane and the pilots to keep you safe.
Wise words, Jeff. Thank you very, very much. Jeff Cozzetti, a former FAA safety manager.
Thank you.
All right, what is going to happen to Britain? Right, everyone wants to know, are you going to leave the European Union or not? Well, it's delayed, or looking like it could be delayed, and now some people are saying it's... All right, this was a scene a little while ago in Paris, France. There are these ongoing protests. They're in their 18th straight weekend. These so-called yellow vest protesters don't much like some of the government rework on finances and the rest. That was one of the reasons why they targeted a bank in Paris and lit it afire. It was on the ground floor of a 7-story residential building. 11 people were in that building, including 2 firefighters. A couple of light injuries there, but that was the extent of it. But these things have gotten increasingly raucous. This is a live scene now. Left of the screen, the ongoing protest. To the right, if we can zoom out of this, guys, the fact of the matter, these are generating huge crowds. Emmanuel Macron, the leader of France, his popularity has tumbled into, depending on the poll, whether you're looking at Le Monde or the others, into the single digits here, as a lot of folks are protesting moves to try to wean or de-wean the government, if you will, off of supporting so many social, they call it birth to grave programs and the like. That is not being well received, and neither is his fix. So we're following that and following why there would be any debate in Britain about being part of a club that includes France or anyone else dealing with these protests. Keep in mind that the European Union still is not keen on having the Brits be given any concessions to stay in that club, but no doubt Brits can look at this and say, why do we want to be a part of a union that includes France and all this raucous division when we can do quite well on our own? That's their hope. Now, the problem with the Brits, of course, is they can't agree on that breakaway, even the fact that they did vote to do so almost 3 years ago. As we speak, they're unable to break from this. To former British Parliament member John Brown. And, John, it's interesting that, much of the attention is focused on Great Britain and whether it can make it in this club or get out of this club. But who the hell would want to be in that club?
Well, of course, the former Conservative Thatcherite and Vice President of UKIP, I totally agree with you. Who would? Who wants to be free? Surely your nation would like to be free and not under a federal state, which in many ways, particularly legal conditions and trading conditions, is alien.
So why can't they just break away? I know that like a no-deal Brexit, harder than it might be, had they done that in the summer of 2016, I know that was not the moment to do it after the referendum, but a lot of these issues would have been settled by now, wouldn't they?
Absolutely. But unfortunately, the politicians did not agree with the population, as it happened in many parts of the world, including in the United States, over the border wall. I mean, the politicians are betraying Brexit. And the extraordinary week last week, on Thursday last week, they did a very strange thing. They voted against the second referendum, but at the same time voted to extend Article 50, which includes the Euro elections and allows UKIP a fantastic swing towards them, of all the people that are so upset with the politicians about betraying them over Brexit.
All right, so let me just get straight on you, because you know this stuff in and out, and I don't, but I do know that Britain's having a devil of a time breaking away. But let's say Britain succeeds, settles this, handles this. I think Brussels is more worried about that outcome, because if the world discovers that the sun rises the next day in Britain, life goes on, wouldn't other countries like Italy, like Greece, like Portugal, like Spain also consider breaking away?
You're so right. You've hit on the Europeans' biggest fear, and of course the implications through that of a breakup of the European Union for the euro. And of course, they immediately, if Britain leaves, they lose their second largest contributor, which in a Europe that's now facing recession and has huge borrowing requirements, far worse on a percentage of GDP basis than in the United States. These are serious matters, plus a massive trading partner. Britain is the 5th largest economy in the world and the largest financial center in the world. And if Britain leaves, that leaves the European Union, including its permanent seat on the United Nations Security Council and its nuclear deterrent, the second most effective in the Western world after the United States.
John Brown, well said. Safely ensconced in West Palm Beach now, as he should be. He's worked very hard in his life. John Brown, very good seeing you.
Thank you very much.
All right, so we're continue focusing on those protests in Paris. So far, no one's seriously hurt, but it is getting messy, and that's the club that Britain wants to break from. Sometimes you can't blame them. More to this. All right, live protests earlier on the left of your screen. This is a little earlier where protesters lit a bank on fire outside a bank on fire. No one seriously hurt, but again, this is the 18th straight weekend we've seen these type of dust-ups. This is particularly violent here, but the fact of the matter is, some have looked at this as a classic case of a government promising everything you want, taking away a lot of stuff that have to be adjusted now, and a populace that doesn't like some of the changes going on here. That's oversimplifying it, enough to say, though, that this is yet another reminder as we look at these protests building steam live now in Paris. These aren't St. Patrick's Day celebrations. These are folks just tired of a government that isn't working for them. And leaders of these various countries who used to snicker at Donald Trump now are in single-digit numbers themselves. The irony of life. Back with us is Lauren Simonetti. We got Gary Kaltham and Dan Geltert. Dan, what do you think of this? Because part of the theme here is that government has failed us, and we have a lot of candidates running on the left here who say government is the answer to help us.
Yeah, government is clearly not the answer to help. I mean, government has a function. Take care of people who can't take care of themselves, defend your nation, those types of things. As government continues to seep into every industry, this is what you end up having, Neil.
What do you think?
Well, let's see. You put in a wealth tax and people leave. You get rid of the wealth tax and you get all the people mad. And then you put back the wealth tax and drive them up a wall again and hurt the economy. And you have economies in recession in Europe right now, people losing jobs. And
that is, by the way, exactly what has gone down in France.
And this is what you get. But unfortunately, there is a certain group of people that want to destroy instead of just protest. They want to destroy banks instead of having a conversation. And this is what you end up with at this point. It's only going to get worse.
You know, you cover right and early in the morning on Fox Business Morning this idea that our markets have been doing very well. Our economy certainly better than what's going on across Europe. And we've been, haven for a lot of capital. I don't know how long that goes on, but given comparisons like this, I can see why it goes on.
There was a consumer sentiment report out earlier this week, and the one thing I picked up on this report is that, well, where's the downturn in the economy here in the U.S., but the bottom two-thirds of people in this report felt better. Their wages are going up. So there's a sense of aspiration, inspiration, as here in the U.S., this idea of wealth and the wealth gap is forming the opinions on the left, right? They want to narrow that gap. I choose to think of it as if everybody makes more money, that is a good thing.
And by the way, people are making more. There was one survey this week, right, Dan, that there are more millionaires now, or the jumping millionaires, than there are people in Sweden.
Yeah, 10.2 million households are now millionaires in the United States. That's more than doubled since the Great Recession. So this is really positive news. However, what I think that we're going to see with this politically is to say, oh, look at this huge disparity that's continuing between the rich and the poor. You see, the system is not working. It only works for the rich. It doesn't work for everyone. And this goes back to the tax laws.
By the way, that's what a lot of these people are proud of. They feel that whatever's been going on in France hasn't been helping us, the common man, and so it can cut both ways, right?
Look, with the political side, it's being said now they're wealthy because they're screwing you. And that's why you got to vote for us, because we're going to take from them and we're going to give to you. And bottom line, that's just never, ever worked. But it is a loud voice right now. It is going to be yelling and screaming as we go into the election. And it is going to be a very polarized left and a very polarized right. And
but they're also employing you as we attack the rich. And maybe the gap is too wide, but Berkshire Hathaway has almost 400,000 workers. Amazon has more than 500,000 workers. So these are, they're employing you. So
But
You gotta
does any
do
of
that.
this kind
And
of stuff hit us? I mean, it's great to be a haven for capital and all that, but if China's slowing down, we got evidence of that, regardless of a trade deal when it comes to pass. I assume it will. Europe is slowing down and all. That will hit us, won't it?
Neil, these are all political games, right? It's very easy for politicians to point at the rich and say, you know what, the scale is skewed in their direction. Why? Because there's less rich. It's all about voting blocks. It's all about getting reelected. And that is the fundamental problem, Neil. You and I have talked about term limits.
But you cobble a coalition of people together who don't like what's happening and they feel left out. That can at least help your near-term electoral prospects, can't they?
Oh, look, polarization, people that get together and have thoughts. And I mean, we're seeing it right now. I mean, some of the rhetoric that's coming out about how bad the producers and the successful and the rich are. And don't worry, we'll take care of you. Everything will be fine. It's loud and clear at this point.
But Neil, didn't this all start with higher taxes? Higher gas taxes in Paris that would hurt the poorer people who lived further from the city. Their commute to work.
And then it extended the benefits that were going to slow down and all, and there we go. And that was the scene earlier today, a bank set on fire by protesters, convinced that at least over in France, things are not working out. And the battle goes back and forth. What is the right elixir to make people feel good and do well? They're trying to figure it out. Maybe we've got it down here.